What's up, everybody? Matt from the Jam Gamecast here. I wanted to do a video tonight, and this is going to be our first impressions video. Um, I don't really want to call it a review, it's more so my impressions of a game I just finished, and that game is Trails of Cold Steel 2, or The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 2. So I just wanted to talk about some of my impressions of the game, some of my thoughts on the game. This video probably will have some spoilers in it, so if you haven't played the game yet and you don't want anything to be spoiled, I would recommend not watching this video. But yeah, here it goes. So first I want to talk about some of my thoughts on what I thought maybe wasn't the best thing or wasn't so good about the game. Um, First, and for me, it was the most glaring thing in the game was the motivation behind the characters, behind Reen and all Class 7 and his classmates and everything. Um, why One of the big things is that they want to bring Crow back. Now, for those of you who played the first game, everybody knows that it turns out, and spoilers for Trails of Cold Steel 1 too, so if you don't want, if you haven't played that game, this is going to have spoilers for that game as well. But one of the main motivations for Class 7 is that they want to bring Crow back. At the end of the first game, it turns out Crow was the big bad. He was the enemy C, which was really cool. I really liked that. I thought C was a cool villain. So in this game, they want to bring him back. Obviously he left school, and war broke out. So school's not even going on. Thor's isn't even in session. Everyone had to flee because of the war going on. But everybody in Class 7, once they get back together, they want to bring Crow back and bring him back to Class 7. I have no idea why they would want to do that. First of all, he lied to everyone in the first game, basically, led them on and pretended that he had no idea what was going on, when in actuality, he was the bad guy the whole game and he was the one causing everything. So, first of all, he lied to you. So, if someone lies to you, why would you want to bring them back to school and act like they're still your best friend? And two, he murdered the Chancellor in the first game at the end. He murdered the Chancellor. So he's a murderer. Why would you want to bring him back and be like, oh, Crow's my best bud. He's got to come back to us? No way. He lied to me and he murdered someone. So I didn't understand why all Class 7, especially Reen, wanted to bring back Crow so badly. It just didn't make sense to me. And like I said, because he murdered the Chancellor, a war broke out. So here he is, he did some pretty bad things, and you're still willing to say, hey, that's my buddy, I want to bring him back, he's not bad, he's still good. That didn't make sense to me. Second thing I want to talk about, is the task list. Now, in the first game, it worked. In the first game, your students, you're going out on these field studies. People give you tasks to do, and you got to do them to, learn how to work together, build up your strength, and everything like that. It made sense that to task list in that game. It made sense to have that in that game, whereas it's in the second game now, and again, it doesn't make sense because you're trying to, ultimately, you want to bring back Thor's, and you want to retake Thor's because it's falls into the noble territory and it's under control of the nobles, and therefore school's not in session. And ultimately, Class 7 wants to bring back Thor's, take back Thor's, so they can go back to school. So the task list didn't work to me. Like, you'd be getting these random tasks from Princess Alphine's brother, Prince Oliver, and he'd be giving you these tasks, and it's like, do we have time for this? Like, oh, can you save my cat? Well, no, I'm trying to take back my school and fight for my school. I don't have time to find your cat. Stuff like that. They should have been concentrating on finding the crystals, in the shrines that they needed so that Reen can make the new weapon for Valimar so that he could match up with Crow and take Crow on. They should it should have been more concentrated on that instead of these little tasks that didn't make sense when you're in the middle of a war and you're trying to take back your military academy. So that didn't really make sense to me. And then another thing that I didn't really like, there's two major, like, and for lack of a better word, they're after stories. The first one that you kind of do is there's a Crossbell story. Now everybody knows that there's two separate games. Everyone calls them the Crossbell games. Um, I thought that this was a very cool idea. I thought it was cool to play as Lloyd, because always seen those games and they look cool to me, but they were never translated into English and never brought over to the West. So it was cool to actually play as Lloyd, and there was someone else, I forget her name, but it was very cool to play as those characters. And it kind of made me excited because I'm like, oh, maybe they'll bring the Crossbell games to the West and translate them into English. I mean, I doubt that would probably happen at this point, but it just kind of gives you that little glimmer of hope. So like I said, cool idea, but it felt a bit forced. They tried to like I felt like they kind of tried to force it into the story, um, into the game, and try to fit it in with Trails of Cold Steel, and it didn't really work. Ultimately, Reen's in Crossbell, because ultimately it ends up where the Civil War ends, but they kind of Erebonia kind of takes over Crossbell and brings Crossbell into, I think they call it like an annex or something like that. So Reen's kind of there fighting on behalf of Erebonia, and he runs into Lloyd, who's fighting on behalf of Crossbell. It sounds really cool, but it feels a bit forced when you play it. So I kind of didn't really like this. And that takes place after the main game is over. You pretty much play the main game, beat the main boss at the end of the game. The Civil Wars ended, you take back Thor's, and then you're just like thrown into the Crossbell little after story. It was kind of weird, but it was still kind of cool. Um, and then the other after story, there's sort of like an epilogue that takes place in the old schoolhouse. I hated this after story. Um, if they wanted to put it in the game, I feel like it should have came earlier in the story. It didn't make sense to me that it's taking place after you already beat the main bad guy in the story. It was kind of annoying because it just felt like, oh, here's an extra dungeon I have to do, and it's super long. It's way too long for something that takes place after the main game. And I feel like there's this huge difficulty spike at the end of the game, at the end of the epilogue. I guess really the ultimate final boss that you fight in the old schoolhouse. There's this huge difficulty spike. I was going through the game and the dungeon and wasn't really having a trouble with anyone. I get to him and I get my butt kicked like 2 or 3 times. Luckily they have an option where you can restart the battle, and it gives you the option. It says, do you want us to weaken the villains or the enemies? And I chose yes because I was getting my butt kicked. So I hated that epilogue in the old schoolhouse. Maybe it would have fit in a little better earlier in the game, but way too long. Difficulty spike for the last villain. I didn't really like it. And then another glaring sort of issue to me at the end of the game, and I feel bad because I'm pointing out all these things I didn't like. I liked the game, don't get me wrong. It is a cool game. Trails of Cold Steel, the first game, is my second favorite game of all time. I enjoyed this. It's definitely not as good as the first game, but it's still a good game. I still really enjoyed it. It's probably like the third best game I played this year. So it's still a really good game. I feel bad I'm pointing out all these things I didn't like. There's a few good things too, but I still really liked it. But something else that just was glaring to me at the end of the game. So the whole game, they're trying to take back Thors. They want to get back to school. They want to go back to school. Fine, that's cool. That's fine. You want to go back to school. So they go through everything that they go through, fight all these fights that they need to. It ends up they get to go back to school, and they finish out their first year at Thors Military Academy. Well, guess what? They went through all that. Nobody's coming back for year 2 except for Reen. Everyone else is leaving. And that doesn't make sense to me. You went through all this trouble to get back your school so you could finish up your first year, and then you're like, well, that was fine, but I'm not coming back next year. That didn't make sense to me. Why would you go through all that trouble if you're just going to abandon the school and leave after your first year's over and you're not even going to come back for your second year? That totally just didn't make any sense to me. So I didn't like that aspect either. So now, like I said, I'm going to talk about a few good things here now. One thing, and I was really surprised about this, were the battles that you get to do when Reen is fighting through Valimar. Basically, it's a mech battle. Usually, I don't like mech battles, and any games that include mech battles are just not my type of game that I really like. But the Valimar battles were cool. And why they were cool is because they simplified it. It was very simple. You could hit the body, you could hit the head, you could hit the arms, you could block, and then you got to link up with a teammate and they could help you too. And then as far as like armors went, they had like crystals that you could have forged, and then they were for speed, strength, and defense. So you know that was really simple too. Not this overcomplicated, armor and weapons type of system. Real simple battle, real simple controls and everything. So I really enjoyed the Valimar battles, which was a surprise to me because I usually don't like mech battles. Second thing that I really liked were the playable characters that you could use this time around. You get to use characters like you could have Tovel in your party. There's one point where you can have Angie in your party. You can have Toa in your party at points. Your sister, Reen's sister Elise, you can have in your party. Sharon and Sarah from you could play with her a little bit, have her in your party a little bit in the first game, but this game you can have her pretty much the majority of the game, which I did because she's super strong. You could have her in your party. You could even have Princess Alphine in your party, which was cool as well. So I thought that was really cool, and you got a lot more say into who you wanted in your party at what times. Whereas the first game, they kind of said, well, you have to have these 3 people, and that's your party. So it's Reen and these 3 people. Well, this game, you pretty much got to pick whoever you wanted in your party. Which is pretty cool. And then the last thing I'll say that I really liked, because like I talked about earlier, in the first game, Crow turns out he lied the whole time and he turned out to be the bad guy. Well, at the end of the first game, he basically redeems himself. Him and Reen team up and take out the big bad at the end of the game, and he redeems himself. So I thought that was nice that Crow, got to redeem himself and, fought with Reen and was able to help out Class 7. So I thought that was cool. So ultimately, these were just my impressions of the game. I didn't really want to call this video a review. It's more so my impressions and thoughts of the game. But, Trails of Cold Steel 2, if you like JRPGs, if you like the first game, you'll definitely like this game. So give it a try. So anyway, until next time, if you like the video, please give us a like and subscribe. We do our Gamecast or podcast. Jim posted some gameplay the other night. So yeah, if you like all those things, check out the channel and subscribe. Thanks again.